Hello, this is Hiroko. Today, I'd like to share a story about the Japanese way of saying no, which is one of the most confusing things for foreigners. Once you understand the true meaning of this culture of gently declining, you'll surely be moved by the depth of Japanese consideration. Mitsui General Trading is a major trading company located in Tokyo's Minato Ward. Makoto Tanaka, 52, a manager in the company's international sales department, is a veteran with 30 years of experience in international business. He values the uniquely Japanese way of saying no gently. 2 springs ago, a Canadian businessman was assigned to Tanaka's department. David Brown, 35, was a talented businessman who had worked in sales for a major Toronto company for 10 years and had achieved many successes. He came to Japan to help develop the Japanese market. In Canada, David had placed great importance on direct and clear communication. He believed that clearly saying yes or no was a sign of sincerity. However, after coming to Japan, he discovered a completely different world of communication. On his first day, David was discussing a new project with Director Tanaka. In response to David's proposed plan, Director Tanaka said, "David, your proposal is very interesting. However, may I give it some thought?" David took this as a positive response. Since Director Tanaka said it was interesting, he assumed it was approved. A week later, when David checked on the progress, Director Tanaka said, "Actually, we're having some difficulty coordinating with the relevant departments. Could you please give us a little more time?" David waited, but 2 weeks passed, then a month, and the project still didn't progress. Finally, Director Tanaka said, "David, I'm sorry, but we've decided to shelve this project for this fiscal year." David was confused. If he had intended to turn it down from the start, why didn't he make it clear? During his lunch break, he consulted with his Japanese colleague, Yamada, for advice. "Yamada, why didn't manager Tanaka say it clearly from the beginning? If he was going to turn it down?" Yamada looked a little confused. "David, actually, manager Tanaka turned it down from the beginning." "Huh? But he did say, interesting." After interesting, he said, "We'll consider it." In Japanese, this means, it's difficult. Why do you say it in such a roundabout way? It's to avoid hurting the other person's feelings. Saying no directly would be seen as rejecting the other person. That's why Japanese people turn things down gently. David didn't understand. In Canada, saying a clear no was considered sincere. A week passed. David accompanied another client to a business meeting. The client was the purchasing manager of a major manufacturer. David presented his product with confidence. However, the client's reaction was lukewarm. "I see, that's an interesting product. However, we need to consider it a bit to see if it fully meets our current needs." David took this as a positive response. However, on the way home, Director Tanaka said, "David, I'm sorry about today's business meeting." "Huh? The other party seemed interested?" "No, actually, they turned it down. We need to consider it," means, we're not interested this time. Director Tanaka explained, in Japan, it's important to save face. If you turn them down directly, it hurts their pride. So, by turning them down gently, you avoid hurting their feelings. In his second week, David attended an internal meeting. The discussion was about a new marketing strategy. A young employee, Mr. Sasaki, made a bold proposal. However, it was clearly impossible to implement. However, Director Tanaka responded, "Mr. Sasaki, that's a great idea. However, there may be some challenges in terms of budget." Section Manager Suzuki continued, "It might be best to wait a little longer before deciding on the timing." No one directly said no. However, at the end of the meeting, Sasaki's proposal was shelved. After the meeting, David asked Director Tanaka, "Why didn't you just say it's impossible from the beginning?" Director Tanaka replied, "Sasaki put a lot of thought into his proposal. It's important to acknowledge that effort. If I rejected him directly, it would discourage him. That's why I gently presented a different perspective and guided him to his own realization." A month later, David was entrusted with negotiating with an important client. The client was the president of a long-established company, known for his cautious nature. David proposed a new product. The president seemed interested, but finally said, "It's a good product. However, we would like to carefully consider it." David understood this to be a rejection. However, this time he tried a new approach. "Thank you for your time, President. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at any time. We will wait for the best time for your company." The president smiled happily. "Thank you. You seem to understand the Japanese way." On his way home, Director Tanaka said, "David, that was an excellent response. Respecting the other party's way of refusing and maintaining the relationship without pressuring them is the Japanese way of doing business." In the second month, David gradually began to understand the patterns of Japanese refusals. "We'll consider it, passing on it this time. We'll consider it positively, there's a possibility, but it's not yet decided. It might be difficult, almost impossible." One day, David found himself in a situation where he had to say no. A client made an unreasonable request. Director Tanaka gave him some advice. "Try saying, 'These terms may be a little too tough for our company. Could you please be a little more flexible in your consideration?'" David did as he was advised. The client didn't get angry, but instead responded positively, saying, "Then let's reconsider the terms." At that moment, David understood. A direct refusal could cause the other person to feel rejected and damage the relationship. However, a gentle refusal preserves the other person's pride and safeguards future relationships. By the third month, David had fully mastered the Japanese way of saying no. A client who had previously rejected him contacted him again. "The timing wasn't right then, but perhaps we can consider it now." David was surprised. If he had been turned down directly, he might never have had a second chance. However, a gentle refusal preserved the relationship and created a new opportunity. Manager Tanaka said, "This is the true value of the Japanese way of saying no. Today's no leaves the door open for tomorrow's yes." After 6 months, David made an important realization. The Japanese way of saying no wasn't simply to avoid hurting the other person's feelings, but also to value long-term relationships. One day, a young employee, Mr. Nita, came to David with a proposal. However, the proposal was clearly impossible to implement. The old David would have said, "This won't work." But not now. "Nita, that's an interesting idea. However, considering the budget and timing, a more gradual approach might be better. How about starting with a small-scale test?" Nita replied happily. "I see, that certainly seems more realistic. Thank you." Manager Tanaka had been watching and later called out to him. "David, that was perfect. You don't dismiss the other person's idea, but guide them in a better direction. That's Japanese communication." As the training period drew to a close, David expressed his gratitude to Manager Tanaka. "Tanaka, I didn't understand it at first, but now I understand the beauty of the Japanese way of saying no. It shows deep consideration for the other person and the wisdom to value long-term relationships." Manager Tanaka smiled happily. "David, you really understand the essence of the matter. The reason Japanese people don't say no directly isn't because they're being vague. It's because they value the other person's feelings and leave room for future possibilities." After returning to Canada, David began to apply the communication techniques he learned in Japan. Even in a more direct culture, he established a style that emphasizes consideration for the other person and building long-term relationships. A year later, David visited Japan again. He reported to Director Tanaka during his reunion, "I'm practicing the gentle refusal technique I learned from Mr. Tanaka in Canada. Thanks to it, our relationships with our business partners have improved, and our business has become more successful." Director Tanaka replied, "That's wonderful. Saying no doesn't end a relationship, it's a step toward building a better one." David now works as a business bridge between Japan and Canada, and continues to emphasize that consideration for the other person is the most important aspect of cross-cultural communication. The reason Japanese people don't say no directly isn't because they're vague or indecisive. It's a beautiful way of communication born from deep consideration. It avoids hurting the other person's feelings, maintains pride, and values future relationships. What did you think? The Japanese culture of gently refusing is imbued with such deep consideration. Not saying no directly is a way of showing respect for the other person and protecting long-term relationships. If you come across this way of refusing in Japan, try to sense the kindness behind it. Next time, I'll be back to share with you the unknown beauty of Japan. This was Hiroko.